Madam Chairman, I have a couple of questions, but first I'd like to thank you for having these hearings. As you know, I'm one of the congressmen that has constituents who rely on marine mammals, including whales, for their culture and subsistence needs. On this issue is very personal to me and my Alaskan constituents. The Alaskan Eskimos primarily are in a unique position both within the International Whaling Commission and within federal laws dealing with the marine mammal conservation and management. In both federal law and in IWC, native culture and nutritional needs are recognized, and Alaska Native rights have to take whales is recognized. We've had a good record, they've had a good record of sustaining these species. They've done a great job, and within the IWC, there's 7 countries with authorized to take a limited number of whales, and one of them, of course, is the United States, primarily Alaska. The IWC generally authorizes quotas of 5-year blocks and renews these quotas at appropriate annual meetings at IWC. Unfortunately, the IWC has become a very polarized organization. Many countries that have nothing to do with whales belong to the IWC. To quote a recent Congressional Research Service report, the International Whaling Commission now has 85 members divided almost evenly between whaling and non-whaling countries. This situation leads to continuous votes and accusations that decisions are not based on science, but on politics, and in particular whether or not a country favors whaling. This polarization within the IWC has led to the denial of quota of the Alaska Native Whaling Commission for more than one occasion. This action has nothing to do with the needs of the Alaskan people or their rights to harvest marine mammals, a right which has been demonstrated and recognized. The denial of the quota has become because some countries have used my constituents as political hostages. It's unacceptable that the subsistence needs of my people can be put on hold because of political debate over the future IWC. I'm very frankly think the IWC is broken because the members that belong to the organization really don't have interest in whaling and their best belief for what's sustainable for the species in which we harvest. Groups that oppose whaling have forced Alaskans to do more research on the bowhead whale than has been done on any other species. This is done by the Alaska Natives. Every Alaskans think that they have satisfied, every time the Alaskan Natives think they've satisfied all their critics, someone comes up with a new hurdle for them to justify their needs. Despite the harvest, the bowhead whale population has continued to increase and is at its highest level since the end of the commercial whaling seasons. The Alaska Native have met every challenge the IWC has put in front of them to justify their harvest, and yet they are still used as political hostages. It isn't right, and it ought never to occur again. Madam Chairman, as I've said before, I think it's crucially important to understand the uniqueness and the recognition of the Alaska Natives' right to harvest whales, and they have done the research as they increase their numbers. Now, Madam Chairman, with your discretion, I'd like to ask about 3 questions. Dr. Hogarth, what has been the U.S. position on Aboriginal subsistence whaling quotas during the time you've been the U.S. Commissioner? And is that position any different from under the past U.S. Commissioners?
The U.S. has always supported, in my recollection, the Aboriginal subsistence whaling. We have done all the science that's been asked. We take it through the scientific committee at the IWC and follow the advice. I hope I don't see any change, and this administration seems to be the same to follow the IWC for Aboriginal.
Well, again, Doctor, does the U.S. support both the Alaskan Eskimo Whaling Commissions and the Macaw Tribe's subsistence quotas?
Well, the Aboriginal limit for the Macaw Tribe is not allowed. It's not set by quota by the IWC. And the Macaw Tribe right now does not have a subsistence quota. It cannot hunt for whales until there's appropriate under the Marine Mammal Act and the Whaling Convention Act. But there is a quota that is awarded by the IWC to which the U.S. Subscribes to the natives.
Well, yes. But does the administration support the Macaw Tribe's treaty right to harvest whales?
Yes.
And do you see any change, I think you're ready to answer it, in the policy of the United States towards Aboriginal subsistence whaling under the new administration?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay. Do you see any change in the administration's positions on any other issues before the IWC?
No, sir. I think all the positions stay the same.
Okay. Do you foresee any change in policy regarding the U.S. Aboriginal subsistence whaling and U.S. Native Americans treaty reserve whaling rights under the new administration?
I have no indication there will be any change.
I thank you, Doctor. You've been a great ally when it comes to this issue over the years, and I understand you're leaving us, and that's a sad day. Probably you'll be happier, but it's a sad day. And it's a great responsibility. You've done an outstanding job, and I'd just like to thank you for your work. And Madam Chairman, thank you so much. This is a very important hearing because it does affect American citizens, not someone living in Chicago or someone living in New York or someone living in San Francisco. It does affect people that are alive and have done this over the histories, and I thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank the gentleman from Alaska. Do you want that?
Yes, I'd like to submit it for the record.
All right. No objections, so ordered.